we do have a record of this so that others can watch this in their own time if they want to. Right. Anyway, if you don't know me, I am Mr. Harper. I'm the head of English at West Somerset College, and we are going to do a series of webinars that will help you with text that you're studying for GCSE. And I would hope that we can do things that aren't always about GCSE as well, or A-level, but things that you might want to talk about. Maybe we can do some creative writing workshops. Maybe we can do something on books that you enjoy. And maybe you could lead a session like this as well. I'd be really, really keen for us to start to play around with the different options that we have. So we're running these about one every fortnight, maybe one every 3 weeks. And this is the only one that we're doing in January, partly because in 2 weeks' time we have Year 11 virtual parents' evening. So I can't do those. And the reason that I've chosen Thursday is because it's my best day in terms of my timetable, so I can spend a bit of time planning and preparing for this if I need to. But just to make you aware then that all of these are optional. Thursday the 4th of February we're going to do what's called a stylistics reading of the poem London by William Blake, which is in the Poetry, Power and Conflict cluster of poems. If you haven't studied it yet, it doesn't matter. You can read the poem before the lecture if you'd like. And that will get you back into the swing of things. Stylistics basically means, it's just a posh way of saying, look at the words on the page and look at the patterns they make. So it's going to be no context, no background information to London. It's not going to be a history lesson. We're not going to do any of the sorts of things that we're doing in today's session, actually, with Macbeth and talking about context and religion. We're just going to read that poem for the pleasure of reading it and thinking about some really cool ideas that you could use potentially in an essay exam if you wanted to. And then on Thursday, the 25th of February, we're going to do an Inspector Calls, and we're going to do a session on structure and form, which is going to discuss things like the morality play genre and how it fits into that genre, how it is a little bit like a detective detective story, but actually subverts many of those expectations. And those are ideas that often students, actually not that hard to write about, but often students who are lower down in the grade boundaries tend to ignore. So that session is going to be very useful. And again, Year 9 won't have done an Inspector Calls. You won't start that until Year 10, or you may do a cold read at the end of Year 9. But it doesn't matter. I know that there are 1 or 2 Year 9s in the group here today. I don't want you to be put off, but you know, we are going to start with three sessions that are GCSE in their style. So a few quick notes before we get into Macbeth and religion. So feel free, by the way, to chat in the chat window. Ask me anything you like. If you feel like there is a question you've got that is something to do with the PowerPoint or that I'm presenting, there's a Q&A slot at 5:20. But if you feel like you've got something really burning that you want to type down quickly, I'll either address it straight away or I'll come back to it at 5:20. So our live sessions are going to be aimed at getting grades 7 to 9. We're not going to do a lot of exam practice. It's going to be delivered kind of content. We're going to be looking at different ideas. We're going to be thinking about ways in which you could maybe improve your ideas through an additional layer of information. I'm going to not apologize for the level that I'm teaching at. It's going to be fairly sophisticated. But please, if you don't understand something and you want to ask a question about something I've said, or another teacher, there are other teachers lined up to do sessions as well. You know, type it in, type your question in. I can always explain it for you. It's not a problem. The format of these 1 hour sessions are: we do the lecture. You can chat in the chat window. If I might ask you once or twice to give a comment, like we might do in a lesson. Online lesson, but mainly it's me talking and you listening, which I hope isn't going to be too monotonous. The PowerPoint, by the way, I will share at the end of this session. So you do not need to sit there with a pen and paper unless you want to. If you want to, of course, I'm not stopping you. So you can always refer back to this at the end of the session. There'll also be the video potentially to look at in your own time if you want to. Year 9, I just wanted to mention for the 1 or 2 year 9s that are in the group, if this is stuff that you've not yet covered in class, which it isn't, we haven't started Macbeth yet. We won't start Macbeth until the beginning of year 10. I'm really happy that you're here in this session. If you know a little bit about the story of Macbeth, it's going to help. But actually, some of the ideas I will try and explain for you anyway. So it is totally appropriate for year 9, but it is probably best for year 10 and 11. I will finish at 5:20, the teaching bit. And at 5:20, I'll start to look at the questions that come in, and we'll just have 10 more minutes there where you can ask questions. I don't think you can, but I've used the same principle that we've got in school at the moment, which is that the microphones, cameras are off, and that's one reason why I can record the session. Oh, and by the way, if this is not, you don't need to say goodbye. You don't need to, well, it's nice to say goodbye, but you don't need to kind of tell me I can't stay any longer, or this isn't for me, I don't want to do these anymore. Like, just, it's fine. Okay, I do understand this is your own time. I also understand that you've had a week's worth or half a week's worth of online teaching. And here we are with another hour of online teaching. I hope that this session is slightly different to the sorts of lessons you've had in your normal school timetable, but listening to a teacher talking for another hour on a computer, I can very well understand if this is just a bit too much. I didn't think that we would be in lockdown for our first session together, but that's how it is. So therefore, I do understand if you feel like it's just too much for you. Done that. And the very last thing before we jump into the text is that at the end, it would be great to have some feedback. The feedback, if you've really enjoyed the session, if you think that it's not quite right for you, if you'd like me to do something different, please let me know. It would be appreciated. I've always wanted to do a gifted and talented group for English since I started at the college. You know that I like to we like to teach English in mixed ability, but I do understand that sometimes that means that the top students feel like they're not being pushed quite as much as they could be. In a way, this is an opportunity for us to cover some of the content in a slightly different way. It's the same sort of content that we would do in class, but please chip in, please let me know how you find it. Before we look at the first slide proper, can I just give credit to 2 teachers who've helped with this presentation. They're Jennifer Webb, and her Twitter handle, if you want to follow her, is Funky Pedagogy. You can visit her website if you'd like. You can see some of her material on there, and Douglas Wise as well. Those 2 teachers share a lot of resources, and I've been in contact with them as well and okayed us using them. I've adapted a lot of this for our own use, but you will find that quite a lot of the kind of background is theirs, so credit to them. Okay, so this session is called Religious Allusions and Classical Allusions in Macbeth. And I'm not particularly religious myself, but I think that it's important for us to consider why religion is such a critical thing in this play. It's not just about faith. It's not just about the Holy Bible. It's not just about kind of God and Jesus and your belief in Father, Son, Holy Ghost, etc. This is about the fact that in Shakespeare's time, and in maybe lesser now, but certainly in Shakespeare's time, your whole way of thinking, your whole way of speaking, your whole way of being, if you like, will be governed by your knowledge, your understanding of the Bible. because religion was such an important thing. Even if you couldn't read or write, and there was a huge percentage of the population who weren't able to read and write in the Elizabethan and Jacobean periods, you would know your Bible. You would know your Bible. You would go to church, and the ideas in the Bible and the way in which the Bible, the Old Testament in particular, is structured are reflected in the play Macbeth. So this is why I think it's really useful for us to consider Macbeth as a play that is kind of quasi-religious, that has significant religious structural and textual overtones. In terms of its narrative, so in terms of the story being told, these are things we're going to discuss in the next 50 minutes. In terms of the structure of the play in collusion with the structure of the Bible, ideas obviously to do with morality, and I'm sure you can already come up with some ideas there. The way in which the Bible Macbeth mirrors or sometimes subverts or adapts and plays with ideas to do with biblical imagery, to do with characterization. So you might be able to make a point already about the fact that Duncan is a Jesus-like figure, perhaps, or maybe a God-like figure. There are good counter-arguments for that as well. But who is Duncan, and who is Macbeth for that matter? Is Macbeth Judas? Is Macbeth Satan? There's even a character called Satan in the play, whose significance is borne out at the end. And symbolism, which obviously coincides with imagery. So what sort of symbols are there in Macbeth that we also see in the Bible, and vice versa? So these are the things that I am particularly interested in when I'm studying Macbeth alongside an understanding of religion. Okay, I please, there's a lot of words on this slide, don't copy anything down. But this is important. Those of you going on to do A-level, quite a lot of you in year 11 who are interested maybe in A-level English and beyond maybe, it's really important that even if you're not religious, that you have a decent, solid understanding of some of the ideas in the Bible. And I would say that no single book has had a greater impact on world literature than the Bible. Think of all the poems in the poetry cluster. Think of an Inspector Calls. Think of year 9, some of the texts that we've been looking at, maybe in terms of autobiography and memoir, and the way in which biblical ideas and morality come into those texts as well. And this is from a critic called Ackerman, and he said that the Bible has colored the talk of the household and the street, as well as molded the language of the scholars. It has become part of the spiritual atmosphere. We hear the echoes of its speech everywhere, and the music of its familiar phrases haunts all the fields and groves of our fine literature. Which I think is a really nice quote that I found that suggests that you know, the Bible isn't just there for us to think about our own morality. It's also there. It's a way of thinking. It's a way of speaking. It's a way of comparing ourselves to others. And there's so much richness in the Bible that we see in Macbeth. Yeah. If there's any questions or you want to stop me, let me know. As I said to you, I'm not particularly religious myself, and my knowledge of the Bible is sketchy. So I'm on slightly difficult ground here for starting a series of gifted and talented lectures with something that I'm not so confident on, maybe, as doing a line-by-line analysis of London, which is the next session. If you are religious and you think I'm saying something that's incorrect, or you'd like to add something to the discussion, then please type it into your chat window. And I'll pick that up as we go. Syntax, another thing, the way of speaking, and vocabulary, common phrases, all good. So a question that we should probably ask ourselves is: was Shakespeare religious? And in a way, without going too much into the historical background of Shakespeare, you know, was he a closeted Catholic, and or was he somebody who was firmly entrenched with kind of Protestant views? I think what's more interesting here is what we've already been talking about, which is that how could he not have been? He lived at a time where religion was central to our existence, and therefore all of the textual references that we get within the play would give you the answer to that. So Shakespeare was unquestionably religious. He may well have questioned religion, which was what a lot of people were doing at the time of the Renaissance, which is this era in which the play was written. But he was certainly religious in the sense that he would think about God and his relationship with God. Those of you in year 10, we would in my class, Benjamin, we're talking about the fact that Shakespeare's father allegedly was a Catholic, was a Catholic with some hand in the gunpowder plot. So there are definitely things wrapped up in the play that suggest that Shakespeare has an intimate knowledge and understanding of religion and sees it as powerful. Definitely a silly question. But this is the thing. Did Shakespeare then explicitly intend to make biblical allusions? So an allusion is a link to the text. Or was his writing a natural product of the rich fabric of religious ideas, of stories, and the language which enshrouded him? And I think this is an important thing for context to think about. You know, Shakespeare is maybe not an overtly religious play. Maybe it is just the fabric of society. Religion was an underpinning factor in everything one did. And it would be ridiculous to write a play that didn't have that. If you know Shakespeare's plays very well, maybe some of you have read others, anything from Romeo and Juliet to Much Ado About Nothing, so even like some of the comedies, A Midsummer Night's Dream. These plays I could have done a lecture on the religious allusions in any of those plays. So Shakespeare is a writer who takes a lot of intertextuality, a lot of references from his knowledge and understanding of religion. So what I'm going to do now is I'm just going to give you a few examples. All right, so this is the bit I've kind of contextualized why I think this is important. I don't know if anyone's got anything that they want to add, or maybe they want to take umbrage or take an argument on whether or not they think the Bible is important here. But feel free to. What I'm going to do is I'm going to talk about some of the key themes and ideas and see how the Bible may have been an inspiration here for Shakespeare. And even if he directly didn't reference the Bible, we can still think about these things as students. So we'll start with the fun stuff, blood and violence. This is a deeply bloody play. I think there's probably only one other play that comes close to Macbeth by Shakespeare in terms of bloodshed, in maybe Titus Andronicus. But blood and violence pretty much from the get-go, isn't there? So where do we see blood and violence in the text that we also see in the Bible, or the references to it? If you want to write notes, you can. But as I say, I'm going to keep the PowerPoints for these sessions on our team page. So here's some quotes and where I think they might be of use for you when we're thinking about the Bible. So here's a quote with a brilliantly gory graphic. Sorry about that. This is Macbeth in Act 2, Scene 2. He's killed King Duncan. He's returned from the scene and he's returned from the murder with the daggers. And his wife has chastised him for bringing them back. So off he goes back again. She goes back again to plant the daggers on the sleepy grooms. And in a soliloquy, Macbeth says, "Will all great Neptune's ocean wash this blood clean from my hand?" So this idea of blood and one's hands being tainted by blood, arguably, is an idea that predates the Bible, to be honest, but it's certainly an idea that's in the Bible as well. Then Lady Macbeth in Act 5, Scene 1, very famously, again talking about her hands and the blood on them, out damn spot, out I say, who would have thought the old man's had so much blood in him? Those quotations give us a sense of almost the transference of the blood from the literal to the metaphorical, and from Macbeth to Lady Macbeth. Blood as a symbol or a concept of guilt. None of that's particularly difficult or groundbreaking. But when we start to think about the references in the Bible, and this is where you might make some gains in your essay, is that these ideas are biblical. In Matthew, he says, when Pontius Pilate, saw that he could prevail nothing, but that rather a tumult was made, he took water and washed his hands before the multitude, saying, I am innocent of the blood of this just person. See ye to it. This then is a direct reference to the betrayal of Jesus. Let's have a look and see. Oops, there's my other slide here. During the trial, Pontius Pilate was the Roman governor of Jerusalem, of Judea. Hello, Emma. And during the trial of Jesus, this idea, according to the stories, he washed his hands to indicate that he believed Jesus was innocent of any crime. If he was killed, therefore, it wasn't on him. He wasn't going to be framed for it. So we get this sense then that blood on one's hands and the washing clean of blood from one's hands is a removal of guilt or a removal of a sin, a betrayal of a godly person. Jesus is God's messenger on earth. And therefore, Pontius Pilate's washing of his hands is symbolic, is an indication of his desire to be innocent, and his desire to become absolved of any crime. I got my slides mixed up slightly there, never mind. So this idea then is in the Bible and is again alluded to within Macbeth on multiple occasions. The idea of blood on one's hands is also in the poem Remains by Simon Armitage, isn't it? Those of us who've studied that poem recently as well. So a lot of you talk about Remains by Simon Armitage being a direct reference to Macbeth, his bloody life in my bloody hands. Well, actually, it roots back a long way before that. And I would probably want to mention that. This is an idea that's important. It's an idea to do with morals. If I talk too much on one thing, we'll run out of time. So here's another quote to do with blood. In Act 3, Scene 4, after Banquo's ghost has emerged, this idea of blood leading to more blood. It will have blood, they say, blood will have blood. And this again, this idea of one violent act leading to another violent act is something that has biblical reference, biblical root. So in Genesis, whoso sheddeth man's blood, by man shall his blood be shed. I don't think that that is a coincidence. I don't think that is a Shakespearean invention. I think this is an adaptation of this idea from Genesis, so from the beginning and the creation of earth. These are the rules set down, if you like, that they closely follow God's creation of the world, and maybe synonymous with something like the commandments. Whoso sheddeth man's blood, by man shall his blood be shed. This is something set down, that this is something that is, you can't query, you can't challenge. It's definitive. This is one that in my year 10 group, and actually in my year 11 group as well, we've gone back and we've looked at in revision this idea that when the sergeant or the captain, in some versions, when the report is given on Macbeth and Banquo, so for those of you who don't know the play very well, in Act 1, Scene 2, we haven't met Macbeth yet, but the sergeant reports to the king They're towards the end of a really bloody kind of civil war, basically. And this report on Macbeth and Banquo is they fought really valiantly. Macbeth's sword smoked with bloody execution. But the report becomes more and more kind of graphic and ghastly, and actually we might end up thinking that Macbeth and Banquo are bordering on psychopathy, that they are capable of anything at all. And the quotation that he gives here, the sergeant, having said that, you might think this was the end of it, except they meant to bathe in reeking wounds or memorize another Golgotha. And this reference to Golgotha then is visualized there in that very famous painting, with a Roman spearing the side of Jesus. Golgotha is also known as Calvary, and those words mean the same thing. It means the place of the skull. So this is the place in which it's alleged Jesus was crucified. So as he's on there on the cross, this idea that people deliberately wounded him further, that they poked and prodded, that this was a man who was, if you like, I was going to say ungodly, but that would be completely the wrong term. But this was somebody who committed sins against the state. And this idea then that one might prod and pursue his already reeking wounds. Therefore, Macbeth and Banquo are being compared perhaps to this kind of soldier, or a Judas-like figure, who exacerbate the downfall or torture the Son of God. There's Golgotha in its real life form, and you can see in that circle there that there's a skull-like formation, and that is the site known as the place of the skull. Famously, this soldier pierces Christ's eye with a spear as he hangs from the cross. What does it suggest about Macbeth and Banquo? It suggests very strongly that they were almost ungodly, that they were blasphemous, that we can imagine them soaked in the blood and the gore of the rebels, and that this was a victory that they reveled in, and they took great pleasure in. There's a bloodlust about it. Okay, so this is how this lecture is working. All right, so we've got some quotes and ideas then that link the Bible and Macbeth in terms of the theme of violence and the theme of blood. And I'm sure that you can think of others as well. And please feel free to add your own notes down on the chat window. By all means, let's get a bank of questions together that we can look at 5:20. And remember, you're free to stay whenever you like. So the king on the throne at the start of the play, who Macbeth murders, Duncan, is quite often associated with Jesus. And the betrayer, the one who commits the sin, appropriate. I'm not going to talk about things like the divine right of kings or the great chain of being, but we should know already, that the king is second in line almost to God, because Jesus, after Jesus's death, this idea that God transfers his power to the king or the queen, whoever is the monarch at the time, was something people firmly believed in. So in betraying Duncan in the way that he does, he's a Judas-like figure. Now we have the issue then that Macbeth becomes king. But Macbeth, we find out in Act 5, for example, is called upon to go and heal the wounded, and can't do it, won't do it, isn't capable of doing it. So Macbeth is, in a sense, a false king, a false god. So let's have a look at some of those ideas about godliness, and about the opposite of God, if you like, the devil, the Judas figure. Very early on in the play, in Act 1, Scene 3, when the witches first meet Macbeth and Banquo, they say, "All hail Macbeth, hail to thee, Thane of Glamis," the first prophecy, the first snippet of the prophecy. And that idea there is important because the phrase "all hail" is something that is in the Bible. In fact, it's quite a common greeting. It's still something you don't tend to hail people these days. "All hail, Mr. Harper." But I quite like that. If you want to do that, that's fine. But you hail a taxi, you hail a bus, perhaps. It's a common greeting, and it originates probably from before the Bible, but in the New Testament, it's used frequently. But in Matthew 26, Judas uses the phrase "Hail Master" quite tellingly at a very significant point as he's about to betray Jesus. This idea, therefore, of hailing somebody ends up being, shall we say, a slightly awry or false, deceptive, can you think of better words, duplicitous way of greeting someone. And that is, biblical scholars will probably agree, I think, on that point, that this idea of saying hail is not necessarily associated with honoring someone. It's maybe to do with sucking up and manipulating at best. So this idea of "all hail" being repeated, the witches tell Macbeth that to flatter him, to betray him, to help him feel like he's the big man. And that kind of wins him over, doesn't it? That's all he needs. He needs his ego flattered. In Act 1, Scene 7, in a really famous soliloquy, Macbeth says, "If it were done when it is done, then it were done quickly." So in your own words, in modern English, that basically means if I'm going to do something dodgy, like kill the king, I just need to get it over with. I need to hurry up. I need to have the moment of death so that I don't think about it much anymore, because his conscience is clearly playing up at this point. And this is, I think, again, a direct reference to John chapter 13, verse 27, when Jesus says to Judas, "That thou doest, do quickly." It's too close, isn't it, to be a coincidence, particularly when you know the Bible really well, like Shakespeare probably would have. I don't know if anyone's got any thoughts. And this then is an important moment in the Bible, because Judas has basically admitted to Jesus that he's going to betray him. But rather than kind of Jesus killing Judas, which obviously wouldn't happen, he treats him like a friend. In fact, he treats him like very intimately. He washes his feet, which is a symbol clearly of care and attention, and he gives him his food. Judas openly admits that he has given himself up to Satan, and Jesus has already recognized that. So remember, what we're trying to do here is we're making the link between Macbeth and Judas, and we're making the link between Jesus and Duncan. Are there good links here? The quotation is good on its own, that quotation, "That thou doest, do quickly. If it were done when it is done, it were done quickly." But let's think then of the biblical reference and the idea that Jesus concedes in a way that Judas has been corrupted, and Jesus says to Judas, "Get it over with." Yeah, do what you need to do. Macbeth therefore says it in the context that he almost in a similar context, as he's got the Jesus figure in his head and he's got the Judas figure in his head, and there's something in between. This is where Freud would call it the ego in between, and the idea we've got, the figure prompting him and pushing him, the witches, if you like, pushing him to kill the king, and we've got the figure, the godly figure that is telling him not to do it. and basically comes down to the point that he wants to get it over. If he's going to do it, get it over with. So he takes Judas's approach rather than Jesus's approach. In Act 1, Scene 4, I have begun to plant thee and will labour to make thee full of growing, blah, 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 blah. Duncan to Banquo, after Banquo's a bit upset that he's not been given any prophecy. This idea of growth throughout the Bible, mainly in the Old Testament, is really common. So another thing that you can do in an essay if you want to write about the biblical ideas is you could talk about the fact that in the Bible, we often get this idea of fruit, the richness of growth. We're not talking about the tree of knowledge or sin here, although there is that link as well. But the idea that that plants and trees and fruit are natural and they grow, and that Duncan will nurture Banquo. Duncan doesn't say anything like that to Macbeth. All Duncan does, Duncan does something similar to the witches, actually. He hails him and he promotes him, and he makes him his right-hand man, if you like. Lower than Malcolm, of course, but he does do that, whereas Banquo's is nurtured. It doesn't help Banquo, of course. Banquo dies, but Banquo's children will become king. And if we remember, James I is supposedly a descendant of the real-life Banquo. All of these things are important. So the idea of growth, the idea of children, the idea of fruit of one's womb, biblical ideas. I'm conscious of the time. 10 minutes to continue with the PowerPoint and the ideas here, and then 10 minutes, if you want, you don't have to have a quick chat. Imagery. Let's think about some images in the play and how they relate to ideas in the Bible. Macbeth in Act 2, Scene 2, as he's about to make this final commitment, whence is that knocking? How is it with me when every noise appalls me? He's freaking out, understandably. And this idea of knocking on doors and the stones that prate, which means to talk and reveal your place, is very much a biblical idea. The Lord cometh and knocketh, it says in Luke. So the Lord will come and knock. And here again, if we accept that Duncan is a Christ-like figure, right, the cherubs will blast in the ears and the eyes of every man the arrival of his, or his sending off. Look at the way in which the Lord comes and knocks. Christ stands at the door and knocks, it says in Revelation. So the idea of knocking and Jesus knocking, the Lord knocking, is appalling to Macbeth. It is like you've committed this sin, or you're about to commit this sin, and this is something that shakes his seated heart, as we mentioned in Act 1. I'm going to skip over the porter, but I do think that the porter scene is important. If it came up in an exam, we would need to be ready for it. But the idea of the gates of hell is something that is in the Bible. And the porter calls his job is to protect Macbeth's castle, and his job is to guard Hell Gate, isn't it? And therefore we've got this idea of the gates of hell. Something else that Shakespeare does that the Bible does all the time is look at the earth being topsy-turvy, which is linked to the weather, which I'll come on to if I have time. So the natural order of things after Duncan's death, the natural order of things is jumbled, ruined. So Lennox says the night has been unruly in his report. This is the morning after, and this is before the discovery of Duncan's dead body. The earth was feverish and did shake. Well, where do we get that in the Bible? We get that in Matthew, describing the events that surround Christ's death. So there's a mirroring, isn't there, of Duncan's death and the effects on the earth and Christ's death. Matthew says there shall be famines and pestilences and earthquakes in diverse places, sorry. And Matthew 27 says the earth did quake and the stones were cloven. So everything has changed, everything has moved and shifted. It's unnatural, which of course it literally is. The death, a murder is unnatural, particularly the murder of God's representative on earth. I'll skip over this, but they're on the slides anyway. But there are similar references in Shakespeare's Julius Caesar and King Lear, very, very similar. If you want to read those, you can in your own time. Think about going on from like the earth and the physical body of the earth, and think about weather as well. So we get storms being a real feature of Shakespearean tragedies and histories as well. And storms, when storms come, they tend to be linked to the death or the downfall of a king. So in King Lear and Julius Caesar on the previous slides, we also see strange weather being represented in lots of Renaissance literature. If you look at, Christopher Marlowe, or you think about John Donne, you think about some of the great Renaissance poets and playwrights, they're all about these wild storms. Something unnatural almost brings them about. Like, you mess with God here and God's going to get his own back. I'll skip over this one, but I mean, it's fairly self-explanatory. We have Macduff here in Act 2, Scene 3, Macduff's first line in the play, as he tries to bring control to the scene. And it's mirrored in Corinthians, his idea of the temple of God. Dark night, and the sun or darkness during the daytime. 'Tis day and yet dark night strangles the travelling lamp. That's such a lovely metaphor. The sun, the travelling lamp, is being strangled by the night, which refuses to give way after the death of Duncan. And in Matthew 27, again, after the death of Jesus, we get, now from the 6th hour was there darkness over all the land unto the 9th hour. It's the same. It's the mirroring. It's the morning remains dark. It doesn't get bright. In probably my favourite speech in the play, this soliloquy that comes after Macbeth realizes his wife, Lady Macbeth, has killed herself. We get tomorrow and tomorrow and tomorrow. Famously reference Hamilton fans in Hamilton, but I will pass over that for the moment. Here's the soliloquy on the screen. I won't read it to you because we don't have time, but this whole soliloquy, this really famous soliloquy, which we can almost treat like a poem in and of itself, is full of biblical references. It's full of them. Take the opportunity at home between now and whenever you like to just have a look at how many biblical references are. The two key ones are on the screen. In Job, it says, "We are but of yesterday and are ignorant, for our days upon earth are but a shadow." Like, we have no control over time. We don't really know what's happened in the past, or we are in the past. We don't know the future. We can't see the future. In Psalms, it says, "My days are like a shadow that fadeth, and I am withered like grass." These ideas then about time and shadow, and candles, these are references. Look at all of them. I've put them all on there for you. 3 minutes until I am forced to stop, because I will force myself. I could talk about this for hours and hours. Time, the inevitability of death, thinking about Jesus in the Garden of Gethsemane. The entire New Testament tells this story about the inevitability, and how death can be inescapable. We have that here. Fate and prophecies, which are also mirrored in Romeo and Juliet and in Julius Caesar. Trees, the moving of Burnham wood. Well, trees and the carrying of branches, the carrying of trees, things that we see in the Bible. It's referenced in one of the oldest poems in English literature. Dates back to, I can't remember, the 900s, maybe the 10th century, I think. They call it The Dream of the Rood. I put it on, some of it on there for you if you want to look at it. But this is an idea of carrying one's cross, carrying one's burden. And in a way, the carrying of the trees and the carrying of the cross that Jesus does are similar. Christ carries his cross, and in a way is quite often theologically mooted that this is an equal partnering. So Christ and cross are aligned. That's why, in a way, that's why we see the cross as a Christian symbol. And it's not kind of a gory glorifying of his death so much as the fact that cross and Christ were significantly tied together. The cross feels his pain and supports his sacrifice. And there are lovely gory images from films that will show us that. Birnam Wood moving towards Macbeth's castle is perhaps a symbolic representation of that. Sacrifice, danger, holy war. Paganism and Christianity, well, it's paganism and Christianity that this play seems to discuss. The medieval era, the Renaissance era, the 1600s, people may have gone to church every Sunday, but they were also superstitious, and they had their horseshoes on their door, and they had, a real skepticism and superstitious fear as well about things. They would have believed in witches. There you go. There's something that is almost anti-Christian in and of itself. The witches themselves have maybe not changed that much actually in their representation in literature, but the witches are very, very important. Macbeth, these are things that you might want to copy down as kind of lines of argument. My classes know that I like talking about lines of argument. These are like theses or ideas that you can then write about in the rest of your essays or responses. So Macbeth, I think, is about how people become victims of the gods and of fate. And all of the ideas that we talked about in this session, and I will wrap up very, very soon, are to do with those. You could link to that line of argument. Here's another one. That Macbeth is fundamentally about a struggle between good and evil. Therefore, it is a retelling of the betrayal of Jesus by Judas. So this play is really telling us how Jesus was betrayed by Judas and the comeuppance that Judas receives. Macbeth and Duncan. I'll leave these for you to look at in your own time. There's some portraits here of Lady Macbeth. These are Lady Macbeths over the years. This is a wonderful, wonderful painting. I had a really good activity that we could have done here if I had time, which is to look at this painting, which was painted in 1768, and it was painted straight after a performance of the play with David Garrick as Macbeth and Hannah Pritchard as Lady Macbeth. They're the most famous kind of pre-20th century actors that did these roles. And look at this painting. This is the moment. Obviously, there's the blood on Macbeth's hands and there's the daggers. So we know whereabouts in the play this has come. What do we see? What is conveyed? And the reason it's interesting to look at paintings to help you revise maybe is because Macbeth is a play. It's not a novel, it's a play. The words should come off the page and onto the stage. Oh, I like that. And that is something that Macbeth, we can't forget as students. It's a shame we can't get to the theatre. It's a shame we can't watch more versions in class. It's a shame we can't do drama and set up our own stage. But there's a visual representation of the play. Let's not forget that it is a work of art on stage. There's loads of detail. Have a look at this in your own time. I've put a few of the ideas on there. Lady Macbeth, Henry Fuseli painted lots and lots of work about the witches and about Lady Macbeth. 45 years later, same production, but he was mirroring very different painting. I very, very nearly finished. Here's a paragraph that you can look at, which I would consider to be grade 9, that uses some of the ideas we've talked about and is written in the sort of way that I would expect my top students to be able to write. So this is slide 54. If you want to get back to slide 54, and you can have a look at that and compare it with your own writing. What's this student doing that you're not doing, maybe? These two slides are the top, or 3 slides, are the top 10 allusions in the play. that are classical as well as religious. So we didn't get time to really talk about classical mythology, but we've got the Greek goddess of witchcraft in Hecate, or Hecate, depending on how you want to pronounce it. Bellona is the Roman goddess of war. Tarquin and Lucretia, they're very interesting figures in mythology. Neptune, Gorgon, and Mark Antony and Caesar. I'm not going to go through this with you, don't have time, but have a look through these notes and see what you can do with them. Come back to me if you want to and let me know what you found. Okay, it's 5:24, so you probably want to have some dinner. And I just remind you, I hope that you've enjoyed it. It's been me talking for an hour, basically, without any kind of stop, which is fine by me. I like talking. But I hope that it's been useful and that it hasn't been too rushed. And I hope that Year 9 students have got something from this as well, even though you're not quite ready for Macbeth. Thursday the 4th, I think everyone should be able to access that, but read the poem London again before you come. 25th of Feb, let's do something on an Inspector Calls. I would like some feedback. I'd like you to say goodbye. I'd like you to, can always send me a private, an email and just let me know whether you found it useful or not. If you didn't and you'd like to give me some feedback on how to improve things, or if you want more essay related stuff, that would be awesome too. Anyway, I will stick around. If you've got questions, this is the last 5 minutes for us to have a quick chat about anything you want to say. So if you ask me a question, I'll be here until everyone's left the room, if that makes sense. Otherwise, you're free to go and have a nice evening, and I will see you when I see you next. Thank you, everyone. Yes, thank you, Benjamin, Jack, Charlie, Poppy, Beth, Jack, Benjamin, Ruby, Emma, Honey. Take care, and you're free to go. Kez, thank you. If any of you want to practice writing and me have a look at it, I'm very happy to do that. Don't burn yourself out, though. Kez Elston, stop it. That's what I like. That's why English is so amazing, Amber. It just sweeps you up. Good, Arabella. I'm so pleased you were there. I know that you're not ready for Macbeth yet, but hopefully you found it useful. Okay, Jack, if you've got any questions you want to ask now, ask away. Otherwise, I'm going to end the call and therefore stop the session. Okay, that's me out of here. See you. Bye-bye.